Good morning. Okay, so we are on Daf Pei Amid Aleph, right at the top of the page of 80a in Shabbos, and we've been up to the halachas that we know that in order to transgress carrying, so you have to either cross a boundary line or carry 4 amos in Rishus Harabim, 4 amos in a public domain. And it has to be a matter of significance. So you have to carry something that actually has some significance. And we've been going through various items. What is the minimum amount that would count as having carried a substance that would count that would constitute significance? What we've seen a couple of times earlier in the Masechta, what we haven't seen yet, is that the intent of what you're carrying is going to define not only what use it has and whether it has significance, but also you could be carrying something of great significance, but it won't count as carrying because it's really not your intent, but that's only servicing the item you're carrying. So for instance, we're about to see somebody carries a quill that has ink on it. The ink is what the person intends to carry in order to use it to write, to mark something. And the quill is simply the device that the ink is in. So even though the quill itself is a matter of significance, but that's not the intent, it's only serving what is being carried. We saw it earlier in the Masechta, somebody's carrying food. The tray they're carrying the food on will not count because that's not the intent. And we're going to measure whether the food has a significant amount or not. And if there's a less than a significant amount, so you have less than a grogeres of food, so even though the tray itself is a matter of significance, but in this case, the tray is null and void and a part really of the food because it's servicing the food, and the food is my intent to carry from one place to the next. Therefore, I would not transgress on the food because it's less than the requisite. And the tray as well, on account of that, it's not an independent item; it's a part of the food. And the same over here. We're going to have the ink in an ink well. So if I don't have enough ink in the ink well, even though that I have the ink well itself, and that should be a matter of significance, but I'm not trying to bring the ink well over. I'm trying to bring the ink over. So therefore, the carrying would be judged by how much ink is in that ink well. So Tana, Shnei Osius B'dyoy. I have 2 letters worth of ink itself, or Osius Shtei Osius B'kulmis. If I have 2 letters worth of ink in a quill, or Shtei Osius B'kalmarin, or if I have 2 letters worth of ink in the ink well, so then I'm going to be chayiv because I carried 2 letters worth. But if I had less than 2 letters worth of ink in any of these, and then I would not transgress, even though that I'm carrying the item itself, that the inkwell, the quill, it's not going to be it's not going to count as carrying because I don't have a matter of significance, and this is based on the intent of the carrier. By Rava. So Rava asks a question. What happens if he's carrying 1 letter of just ink and 1 letter of wet ink in the 1 letter's worth of wet ink in the quill, or azachas bekalmarim, or 1 letter of wet ink in the inkwell? So they're not combined, they're not together. But I have half the requisite amount, which we said in order you have to have 2 letters worth of ink in order to transgress. That's enough to make something out of the ink. But I have half in one substance and half in another substance. Mao teku. The Gemara doesn't have an answer. Tishbri taras kushis vebos. Amar Rava. So Rava said similarly. If he took 2 letters worth of ink and he's carrying it in the quill, but he wrote it, he was writing as he was walking. So he put it, he carried it across a property line, or he carried it 4 amos, and then he's writing. Is that called the hanacha? We know in order to transgress carrying, you have to uproot, meaning lift up an item from its place, carry it across the line, a property line, or the boundary line, or across 4 amas, and then put it down. Is writing it considered putting down? So Rabbi says chayev is chayev. Ksivasan zuhi anachasan. That is placement of the ink. You're putting it down where it belongs to be, on a piece of paper. The Amar Rabbi said further, however, if you wrote something, you took a quill with enough ink to write one letter, and you go to where you 4 amas, you carry it across 4 amas, and then you write it down, and you write one letter. You go back and you dip the quill back into ink, and you carry another letter's worth, and you write that. You're going to be exempt, because by the time you get back, the ink has dried, and ink that dries shrinks. So you've lost some of the amount, and it's no longer 2 letters worth at the time that you got there with the second ink full of ink. Another second letter's worth of ink. By that point, and you need them to combine at that point in order to have transgressed 2 letters worth. By that point, the amount has diminished. Obviously, if you carried more than 2 letters worth, then it doesn't make a difference that it dried and diminished some. We're talking about in a case that it actually was just exact 2 letters worth. And obviously that's not easy.
I missed something. What? I missed something. Why is the case here when there's 2 averas going on at the same time? There's Hoitzah and there's Shtei Oisios. Why do we need a case where it's 2 separate averas happening simultaneously?
We don't need that. That just happens to be the case of how you're going to have the ink dry. He's not dealing with the transgression, the isser of kasiva, of writing. He's dealing with the carrying and just measuring. He's saying that if you took exactly 1 letter's worth in the quill and brought it over and actually wrote with that, and then you go back and you bring another, so at that point, the carrying you don't have the requisite amount to combine, because one is dried already, and so by the time you brought the second one and you wrote that, it's already diminished.
Got it.
You don't have a combined 2 letters worth.
Right.
My time, and what's the reason? But idna the apka, so at the time that he brought the second quill full of ink, the first measure, which is an exact measure of a letter, is diminished. Rava said another case. The introduction to this we need is, we saw earlier in the Masechta, if somebody picked something up and transferred it over 4 amas, actually threw it over 4 amas, but it never landed. Instead of landing, a dog caught it in its mouth, or it got burnt up in the air, then is exempt, because he didn't do a hanacha. So Rava's case over here is similar to the ink, but in food. We said the requisite amount of food in order to transgress is a grogeres, a fig size. This person carried half a fig size of food and put it down, and goes back and brings another half a fig size of food and puts it down. Rava says the first one's gone, null and void, and the first half, and therefore it doesn't count to combine. Why is the first one as if it's not there? So he says, on account of that, it's like a dog ate it, or not a dog ate it, a dog received it in its mouth, so it was never a hanacha, or it got burnt up in the air. So Gemara says, V'amai. Why? Hamancha. It's right there. He brought half a fig, put it on the ground, it's right there. He put it down, and it's still there, and he brought another half, and he put it next to it. That should combine. So the Gemara says, no, actually, we're missing part of the case. Hachikama, this is what he meant to say. If before he put down the second half a fig, or whether it's a fig or food, but half a fig size of food, You put it before he put the second one down near the first one was lifted up by himself, by someone else. The idea is it's no longer there. It's not in its place. So he never had a combined hanacha, a combined placement of the requisite amount. And so they can never combine for the grogeres shear, the grogeres measure, in order to obligate him in a chatas offering. V'amar Rava, and Rava says further, he took a half of a grogeres worth of food and he put it down. And then he took another half of grogeres worth of food, and he didn't put it down next to it, but carried it directly over it. And Tosis explains within 3 tefachim of the food, but not 3 tefachim of the ground. And we know that 3 tefachim is a minimum space for something to combine in space. It's called a lavud. So we have, if it was within 3 tefachim of the ground, it's as if it's placed on the ground. If it's within 3 tefachim of the food, but not within 3 tefachim of the ground, so they would have to combine. Chayiv, indeed, they combine, even though he never put it down, but he just carried it over it, it'll combine, and Chayiv, and he has to bring a sin offering for transgressing carry. Va'amai, and it says, but why would they combine? Va'leinach, it never landed, it never was placed down. Half the grogeres size was put down, but the other half wasn't put down. And we just said that the requisite that the 3 components of carrying is akira, uplifting it, ha'avara, transferring it across the space, and hanacha, and putting it down. And over here, the second half was never put down. So Gemara says, Kiva kagoyin she'avira tech shleisha, because it's within 3 tefachim, and therefore it's 3 tefachim of the other half, and so it's going to combine. Gemara says, wait, but Rava is the one that's saying over here they combine, and Rava has told us elsewhere that even though we learned according to Rabbi Akiva, remember at the beginning of the Masechta we learned that there's absorption in airspace, that kluta, once something is in the airspace, kamishon chadam, it says if it's placed down, and therefore it counts as having placed it in the other domain. So that would be good according to Rabbi Akiva, but Rava told us that according to the Rabbanan, you actually needed to land on something in that space. Otherwise, it won't count. Now, even though that since it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, it would constitute that it's on a significant space. As we saw earlier in the Masechta, in order for something to count as having been hanacha, as having been placed somewhere, it requires to be on a daled al daled, on a 4x4. Here, since it's within 3 tefachim of the ground will make it count as 4x4, but it has to be placed on something. It can't be in the air. If it didn't land on anything, Rava says the Rabbanan would say that it doesn't count as a hanacha. Lakasha kam bezorik kam b'mavir. Gemara says, you're right. When did Rava say that it has to land on something? When you're throwing it. So it's in the air and moving. It's not going to count as kaluta, as absorbed, even if it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, unless it lands on something. Once it lands on something, then you can say it's landed, and it counts as a 4x4, a significant space, because it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, and they will count as a hanacha. However, in this case, you don't need that, because it's in his hand. It's already resting and landed. As long as it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, it counts as having been placed somewhere. So we have multiple cases of Rava where half of a measure was taken out and the other half of the measure was taken out subsequent to that. And in some cases they will combine because the first part is there and the second part will combine with it. And sometimes it won't because the first part already either diminished or is gone. Tana Rabbana. If somebody forgot that you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos and took a half of grogeres worth out, and then again did the same, they will combine since they're behelam echad, they're in one lapse of knowledge. But if in the midst you remembered that you're not allowed to carry and then forgot again, pater, you will be exempt. because since they're in two separate ha'alamos, each one alone does not combine, it does not count in order to combine to the other. However, Rabbi Yossi says, not only do we say that it has to be in one lapse of understanding that you carry the first half and the second half, but not only one lapse, but it also has to be in one domain. Now, it seems to be machlokes Rashi Tosos. Are we talking about from one domain, or they have to go into one domain? We're going to go with the version of Rashi, which is the text that we have in the Gemara, that it has to go into one domain. So you're carrying from a private domain into a public domain, and then again from a private domain into that same public domain. But if you carried from the house into one public domain, and then from the house into a different public domain, you'd be exempt because they don't combine, because one half of the requisite amount is in one public domain and one is in the other. And Amar Rabba, and Rabba said, it must be that between the two public domains, there's an actual private domain, a biblical break between the domains. And as you may remember from the beginning of Masechta, there are 4 domains. 2 of them are D'Oraisa, are Torah domains, a private domain, which is a proper private domain enclosed, and a public domain, which is a proper public domain. It is a public square that is has to be 16 amas wide, has to go from one end of the city to the other without many curves or curvatures. It has to be easy going. It has to be an intercity. Rashi's and Tosos hold that it has to service 600,000 people. And it's much bigger than just your sidewalk. But there are 2. The Chachamim made 2 other public domains, which are 2 other domains, which is private domains that you can't carry in, and public domains and quasi public domains, which are the Carmelists. Basically, it acts like and seems like a public domain, and therefore you have to treat it in some ways as such. So this space that's between the 2 public domains has to be a proper private domain in order to split them. But if you have a public domain, Rabbah says, and then another public domain, and in between is a park, but it's open space. So that's not a private domain, the Oraisa. It's in the Oraisa would be a Makam Pater, it would be just an open space. And therefore that would not break the 2 public domains. And if you look at your diagram in the Rashi of the Gemara, you'll see that you have a Carmelist in between. That would not count as a break in the public domains, Rabbah says. Aval Carmelist, but a Carmelist would not count as a break in the public domains. Abaye says, I feel a Carmelist. No, a Carmelist would count as a break in the public domain. Aval Pisla, but if you had a sort of a platform that doesn't have its own halachic space, that would not count as a break in the public domain. So let's say there was a beam across the street where people would walk across for whatever reason, that would not count as a break in the public domain. And Rava says, no, even a pisla would count as a public domain, a break in a public domain, and it's a break in domain. And similarly, we see in Gittin. Rava says, follows his opinion elsewhere. That the space, domain for Shabbos is the same as a space and domain for Gittin. And by Gittin, the case is somebody tossed a get to his wife as he's divorcing her, and the get must come into her possession. She's in his property, and he tosses it to her. So when it lands by her, so if it lands within her space, that space that he would have given her, and it counts as hers. But if he gives her rights to absorb, to acquire within his space, but there's a beam, a platform of some sort that is between her and the get, that would count as a break-in domain, and she has not acquired the get, when it landed in that space beyond that pisla, that board or platform. And so just as in regards to get, it counts as a separate domain, so too in Shabbos, it counts as a separate domain. Essentially, in order for the two parts to combine, they have to be in the same public domain without a barrier in between that has halachic significance. Rabbah says it has to have biblical, Torah level halachic significance. Abaye says no, even rabbinic, and Rabbah says even this rabbinic one is going to count as a barrier between. Kachol kedei lakchol ayin achas. This was a blue dye that would use as sometimes medicinally, but also as a makeup, as eye color. So enough to put in the one eye, that would count as a significant enough substance to carry and transgress when you carry it. So ayin achas solikachli. Well, nobody puts makeup on one eye. Yes, there are women who not only do they wear a face cover, but they cover half their face, half their eyes, and they leave one eye open and the other is covered, and so therefore their eye is they only wear makeup on one eye. So we ask a question. Rav Shimon ben Elazar says kachol, that this blue dye imler for. If the intent of this kachol is medicinal, so it's sufficient for one eye, because people put one eye in their one eye for medicine, because they only need the medicine in one eye. But if they're doing it with the intent of makeup, of beautifying, the bezinayim, there you need enough for two eyes, because that's what people do, put on makeup in two eyes. Hillel, the son of Shmuel Achmeni, said that brisa that says that you need two, that's talking about villagers, be'ironios. Villagers, the women would not cover their face because people were not as frivolous and lewd in the market. But in the big cities, people, Rashi says, were more protective of themselves and would cover their face, and they only protect one, and they'd only uncover one eye. Yet that eye had makeup on it, and so they would put the blue dye on that one eye. So that's significant enough to carry one eye's worth of makeup. We're going to skip the parentheses for now and come back to it. Devek, well, in the Mishnah it said glue. What's the glue for? Somebody trapping birds would put a piece of wood on top of a stick and put glue on the top and lift the stick up high, and birds would land on the top of the stick with the glue, and this way they would catch the birds. It's enough to put glue on top of the shafshaf, this board that was on top of a stick that trappers had. Zephes, tar, v'gofris, and sulfur. So kedei lasos, in order to make let's just say, a moment. And enough to make a hole. So what kind of hole? Kedei lasos nekev cotton, and to make a small hole, which would burn through the wood or the lime in order to make a hole. Charsis, kedelasis pikur. And then shava. Here's where we go back to the parentheses. Shava kedei litin al pi nekev cotton, and wax enough to seal a small hole. Tana kedei litin al pi nekev cotton shal yayin. This is to seal a small hole of wine. Now, why is that relevant? Because some substances are thinner. Some liquid substances are thinner, and they would run through a thinner hole. And some substances are thicker, and they would need a bigger hole. And so when you're sealing a container that has something, so when you're sealing a container of honey, you're going to need more wax because the hole for honey is likely to be thicker. And when you have a hole in a water spout, you're going to need a smaller amount of wax, because there the hole is likely to be smaller. So what kind of container are we talking about? Wine, which is in between. Charsis and ground up limestone or brick, cement, enough to make a pikur. So here we saw in the Mishnah that there was two opinions. Charsis, the earthenware ground up, is to make enough to make the hole, the opening for a silversmith that they would make in their furnace. And Yehuda says enough to make a small tripod. So Lamemra, the shiura, the Rav Yehuda nafish. So that sounds like Rav Yehuda's measure is greater than that of the Chachamim. That Rav Yehuda requires a larger amount of substance to carry in order for you to be transgressing and chayiv v'chatas. But we know that Rabbi Yehuda has a smaller amount, and the Chachamim are greater, as we saw a couple of days ago, with the gemim, with this seaweed plant that they would use. And Rabbi Yehuda said a smaller measure, that you only need the amount to measure a child's foot, and not enough to make something a hook for your colander. That it's enough to just have a small measure for the feet. What it meant, it didn't mean, when Rabbi Yehuda said for a small tripod, it didn't mean you're actually making the full tripod, but rather to seal the crack in a small tripod. We saw further that subin in bran, which was a type of waste from grains, which they would seal up the hole of silversmiths. Tana Rabbanan. We're on pay on the base now. Tana Rabbanan makes a shear kadei legabel by esatit. Tit lasses pikur shel tzarfezov. The Brisa said that to carry, you have to have enough that you would mix and create some clay, some cement, and enough cement that you can seal up the opening in of a furnace for goldsmith, where they would blow the air in to fan the flame. Sid kedei losid. So we had three, as far as plaster goes, we had three opinions. We had Sid, and in the first opinion says kedei losid katana shababanos, that enough to put plaster on a little on a minor or a small young woman, and Rabbi Yehuda says enough to make a kilkil, and Rabbi Nechemia says enough to make a undafi. So we're going to try and figure these out. So what is the first one? Sid tana kedei lasid etzba katana shababanos. It's enough to put a plaster on a small finger of a young woman. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav b'nei Yisrael shegiel lepirkan v'lo yigiel l'shanim. Young women, Jewish women that reached their period but didn't reach their years. So Rashi learns that means that they reached puberty, but they didn't reach the age of puberty. So then they would remove whatever hairs they have because they were embarrassed. Tosa says no. What it means is that lepirkan, the period meaning they got to the age that they were worthy of getting married, but they did not yet get male partners, so they didn't have someone to get married to, so that they would do this to beautify themselves. So they would remove their hair. How would they do that? But Nesaniyim, Tofla says some basid. This was a form of waxing. They would use a plaster if they were poor. But Nesashirim, but if they were wealthy, Tofla says some basolas. They would use fine flour. And Benos Malachim and princesses. Tofla says b'shemen amor. They would use myrrh oil. Shenamfor says Shisha Chadashim B'Shemen Amor. It was we learned by Esther that they would do that in preparation to go to Achashverosh. They would be 6 months with myrrh oil. My Shemen Amor. Amar Rav Huna Satchis. He says that it's satchis. This is a spiced oil. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Omer shemazai shall be a shlish. What it is, it's a olive oil, but the olives were unripened, and so the oil they made was highly acidic, and that would that would soften the skin and remove the hairs. Tani Rabbi Yehuda Omer an piknun shemazai shall be a shlish. Piknun is this olive oil that the olives were not ripened. Up to so much that it didn't even ripen a third. And why would people use them? Shemesh is a seir, because it removes hair. And softens the skin. However, it's highly acidic and it's really difficult for a person to bear. So Rav Beva brate. Rav Beva is for his daughter. What he did was tafla aver. He would get her have this done to her, but one limb at a time. And when that it did one limb and softened it and removed the hair, and when that healed, then went to the next. Rashi tells us earlier on the page that these things would also cause redness of skin and made them very red. And as a result of that, she looked so beautiful after this treatment of limb by limb, slowly using the Shemen Amor, Shaka Badala Mei Zuzi. In the end, she was so desirable that he got 400 zuz in the dowry for her. There was a non-Jew in his neighborhood who saw that what happened. And he also had a daughter. So Tafla Bechad Zimna, he didn't know the method of doing it, and he tried to imitate Rav Beva and without getting the advice on how to do it, and then he did it to her all at once, and she died. Amar Kata Rav Beva Labrati, and he said, Rav Beva caused the death of my daughter. Amar Nachman, Rav Beva the Shasi Shichar Bayim Manati Tafla. You know why Rav Beva's daughter needs this treatment? Because Rav Beva drinks drinks beer. And so she needs this treatment. Anan the later shatinan shichra lebeinan benata and tafla. Our daughters, I don't drink beer. I drink wine, so my daughter doesn't need such a treatment. As the beer drinkers versus wine drinkers smackdown. Yeah, Rabbi Yehuda Eimer Kadei Lasad Kilko. So Rabbi Yehuda says that the sid, the plaster being used, is to make a kilkel. So what is kilkel? My kilkel, or my indifi. Or Nachman said, or Mechemi said indifi. So what are these? Amar Rav, so Rav says tzida, that the kilkel is taking a little lime and they would use it on loose strands of hair, baby hair, near their temple in order to make it lay. So basically like a hair gel. Ubas tzida and is for the sideburns to remove the hairs that are in front of the ear. That's below the tzida, below the temple. Gemara says, "L'meimra d'shura der Yehuda nafish." Well, that would mean that Rabbi Yehuda has a greater measure than the opinion before him. Hakaimel d'shura der Rabbanan nafish. But we know that Rabbanan are the one that the measure that the Rabbanan is stricter, like is a greater amount, or Yehuda is stricter. He says even a less amount, as we saw before in the measure of a child's foot. So Gemara says you're right. Nafish zutim et Rabbanim and nafish mit Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Yehuda is less than the Chachamim who said that it's enough you need enough to put plaster on a limb of a young woman. The Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's enough to use like a hair gel, and to that Rabbi Nechemia says that even less, enough to remove some hair from the sideburns. Mesave, but we ask a question: if this is all what it means, Amar Rebbe Niran Div Rabbi Yehuda b'chavut. He follows Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in regards to chavut, which is a very runny and diluted plaster, whereas but in a thicker clay-like plaster, there he follows the opinion of Rabbi Nechemia. Now, but if you tell me that both of them are talking about a measure of beauty, one is a hair gel, and one is as removing some hairs from the side of the ear. So both of them are talking about. Both would be talking about plaster as it's used as toiletries, as something that's for beauty, and that would be a diluted loose plaster. Elam Rav Yitzchak, Amri Devei Rav Ami Andifi. So Rashi has two versions here. We're going to go with the version Rashi likes. It's talking about Andifi is a earthenware vessel, which has two openings, and it's I guess it's sort of like an aerator for wine, and that's what it's talking about. Maskefler of Kahana. So if Kahana says, would a person make his money just throw his money out? Because if you put plaster on the opening of such a jug, the wine's going to eat through it, and then he's going to lose his wine. Elamar of Kahana shenosas. Rather, if Kahana says we're talking about something else, we're talking about shenosas. The person would put lime on the outside of his jug to make it into a measuring cup. I tell you, this is a quarter cup. This is half cup. So those lines, that's what it's talking about when it says shenosas, that he put the plaster on. As we learn shenosas that there were these lines, the measuring lines in the hin measuring vessel in the Beis Hamikdash, ad kan lapar, and it would say up until here you need of the nesachim, of the libations for a bull, ad kan la'ayil, up until here you need for a ram, ad kan lakeves, here up until here you need for a lamb, or perhaps what andifi over here means is my andifi aputa. That what andifi over here means, it's the hair on the forehead, and it was there to make the forehead red and to remove the hairs. Like this Galilean person that came to Babylon. The Amrulay kum drush lanu b'ma'asim arkava. He said, "Come and speak before. Teach us about the ma'asim arkava. Teach us about the understanding of the way of Hashem in interaction with the world." Amaluhu adrash lahu kedadarish Rabbi Nechemia lechavri. I will give you a drasha the way Rabbi Nechemia did to his students. V'nafka arita and minkosel, some sort of creature jumped out of the wall. Umachte ba'andifi, and hit him in the andifi. So we see andifi is the forehead. Umis, and he died. And they said to him, it is from him that this happened to him. On account of that, he should not have publicly been teaching the Merkava, as we learned in Chagiga, that you're not allowed to teach. You're not allowed to teach Ma'aseh Merkava to public. You can only teach to one student at a time. In any case, so we see the andifi is the forehead. So we had various versions of what the andifi is. This plaster being used in a smaller amount than Rabbi Yehuda says that it's like a hair gel to flatten the small hairs that are at the temple, and even smaller measure than the Chachamim would say that it's plaster to remove hair from finger of a young woman. The Mishnah continues with clay made for vessel making. So adama kachosam hamarutzafim. So the clay that you're using over here, what would you? It's enough you have to carry enough, not enough to make a vessel, but enough to make a seal. A seal on what? So the first opinion says a seal on sack that is going to be taken for trade from one city to the next. So they would seal those. That seal is, if you had enough to make a seal that large, that would be sufficient. Rabbi Akiva. Chachamim say even less. Enough to make a seal on a letter. Zevel. What about fertilizer? V'chol hadak, and thin sand. Rabbi Akiva says enough to fertilize a line of Brussels sprouts. The Chachamim say kedei l'zavel kresha, enough to put fertilizer on kresha, which is kaflut, cress, and that would be less than what Rabbi Akiva required. Chol hagas. What about thick sand, which is used to put into cement? So that would be enough to put on one trowel's worth of plaster. Kane kedelasas kulmis, a reed, then you'd have to have enough to be able to make a kulmus, a pen. Vem haya'ave, if it's too thick, a marusas, or it's too broken. It's enough that you could use it for a kindle to cook a small egg, terufa, but it has to be a scrambled egg, which will cook quicker. Unasuna be'ilfas, and it's in a pot, so it would cook quicker. So the Gemara now explains. Al maloi kafsid, enough thick sand to put on a trowel of plaster. Enough to put on a trowel of plasterers. Whose opinion is it that this thick sand is actually good for plaster? This opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanya, as we learned, Rabbi Yehuda says, and this is the halacha in regards to remembering the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, that when we do certain things to beautify our house, we have to leave a certain area that's not complete. So when you plaster the walls, one area should not be plastered, or the plaster you use should not be the best. And Rabbi Yehuda says, "Lo yasid adam as beis basid elam ken yirvei teven." Ochol. Rabbi Yehuda says, the Brisa says you shall not do plaster on your house unless you include either straw or large sand inside that plaster. However, Rabbi Yehuda says no. Teven mutter. Teven you can put in straw. Chol usher, but thick sand that you can't put in because that actually adds to the plaster, makes it better, not worse. Because that makes it a strong plaster. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the sand is actually good for it. Rava says no. Actually, Rabbi Yehuda says it's permissible because it makes it worse. The reason you're allowed to, Rabbi Yehuda, afil tema rabbanon. We can even say that it's the rabbanon. And the fact that because the sand is bad for it, that's why it's zeotikuna. That's why you're allowed to carry it on Shabbos. All right, we're out of time. We'll continue tomorrow with reed making and finish up this Mishnah and go to the next Mishnah.